In 4 years, the most profitable companies in the history of the world erased more than 650,000 jobs. Not in a crash, in a boom. Their profits were hitting records, their stock prices were climbing, and their spending on machines was going vertical, towards $600 billion a year. This is a story that was hiding in plain sight, not in a leaked file, in the earnings reports anyone could read, in two columns no one read together. On one side, people removed, more than 240,000 of them in a single year. On the other side, hundreds of billions of dollars committed to silicon, to warehouses full of chips that cost $30,000 each. The layoffs and the orders for those chips were not two separate stories. They were the same decision, written on opposite sides of the same balance sheet. Publicly, it was called efficiency. But efficiency is never abstract. Someone always pays the bill. The only question worth asking is the one almost no one did. Who paid, and for what? To understand the axe, you have to start with the hiring. For most of the last decade, big tech did not cut. It collected. Through the pandemic, as the world moved online, the largest technology companies hired like the future would need more people than it had ever needed before. Between 2020 and 2021, Amazon nearly doubled its workforce, from around 800,000 people to more than 1.5 million. Meta added tens of thousands of employees in 2 years. Google, Microsoft, Amazon, all swelling, all racing to staff a digital world that seemed to have no ceiling. Headcount was not a cost, it was a trophy. A growing payroll meant a growing company, and Wall Street paid for growth. Recruiters were hired to hire more recruiters. Whole teams were built for products that did not exist yet, on the theory that talent itself was the moat, that whoever held the most engineers would hold the future. It was a reasonable belief. For 20 years, it had been true. The companies that hired fastest won. People were the asset that compounded, and the people who took those jobs believed it too. They moved across the country. They turned down other offers. They were told, in onboarding decks and all-hands meetings, that they were joining something permanent, that they were the most valuable thing the company owned. For a while, the numbers agreed. By the end of 2021, the 5 largest American tech firms employed well over 2 million people between them. No one in those rooms was thinking about a machine that could make the trophy obsolete. But the machine was already being built, and the bill for it was already being written. It just hadn't come due yet. The first crack came at the end of 2022. The world reopened. People put down their phones and went outside. The growth that had looked like a law of nature turned out to be a wave, and the wave was breaking. Interest rates rose. The cheap money that had funded the hiring spree dried up. Advertising softened, and the companies that had spent 2 years collecting people suddenly had more of them than the slowdown could justify. In November 2022, Meta did something it had never done. In a single morning, it cut 11,000 jobs, about 13% of the entire company. It was, at the time, the largest layoff in its history. Then the others followed, almost in formation. In January 2023, Google cut 12,000. Microsoft cut 10,000. Amazon's cuts expanded until they reached around 27,000 roles. Salesforce, Spotify, Twitter. The announcements arrived so quickly they blurred into a single headline. And the explanation everywhere was the same. We overhired. We grew too fast. We are correcting. It was true. They had overhired. And in that first winter, the story held together perfectly. A pandemic bubble, deflating. A reasonable correction after an unreasonable boom, painful, but understandable. The kind of thing that happens once and then ends. That is how almost everyone read it. A one-time reset. But a reset has an end. You cut back to the right size, and you stop. This did not stop. The cuts of 2022 were not the bottom of a cycle. They were the first month of a new logic. One that would keep cutting long after the bubble was gone, long after the profits came roaring back. The correction was real. It was also a cover story. And underneath it, something far more deliberate was already taking shape. The shift was a single word and a single memo. In early 2023, Mark Zuckerberg stood in front of his company and gave the year a name. He called it the Year of Efficiency. On its face, it was a management slogan. Flatten the organization, remove layers, cancel lower priority projects, ask every team to do more with less. Meta announced roughly 10,000 more job cuts, on top of the 11,000 from November, and said it would leave another 5,000 open roles unfilled. But read the memo closely, and you find the part that mattered. In the same breath that Meta promised to become leaner, it promised to spend, not less, more. It would, in its own words, double down on artificial intelligence. The cuts to people and the commitment to machines were not in different documents. They were in the same sentence. This was the moment efficiency stopped being an apology and became a strategy. Because here is what changed. In that first winter, a layoff was a confession. We made a mistake, we are fixing it. By the year of efficiency, it was a virtue. A flatter company was a better company. Fewer people was a sign of discipline, of focus, of seriousness about the future. And the future increasingly was not measured in employees. It was measured in compute. You could watch the reframe ripple outward. One after another, the largest companies adopted the same vocabulary. Efficiency, right-sizing, prioritization, focus. The words were soft. What they described was not. Across the industry, more than 240,000 jobs vanished in 2023 alone, more than the year before, in a year when the crisis was supposedly over. This was the fine print. The line no one reads until it is too late. Efficiency did not mean spending less. It meant spending differently. It meant moving money off one side of the ledger, the side with names and salaries, and onto the other, the side with chips. To understand where the money went, you have to look at what it was buying. At the center of the AI boom is a single piece of hardware, a graphics chip made by NVIDIA called the H100. One of them costs between $25,000 and $40,000. That is the price of a car, for one chip. But no one buys one. They buy them by the thousand. Wire 8 of them into a single server, and that server costs around $300,000. Build a cluster of 1,000 chips, and you are spending $30 to $50 million. Build one of the large clusters, 10,000 chips, the kind needed to train a frontier model, and the bill runs to $300, $400, $500 million for one cluster. And the largest companies were not building one. Added up across the industry, and the numbers stop sounding like budgets and start sounding like national economies. In 2025, Amazon's capital spending was estimated at over $100 billion. Microsoft, around $80 billion, Alphabet near 80, Meta over 60. Roughly half of it pouring directly into AI infrastructure. The chips, the servers, the buildings to hold them, the power to run them. And the line kept bending upward. Analysts projected that in 2026, the largest cloud companies together would spend more than $600 billion, with around 3/4 of it, something like $450 billion, tied directly to AI hardware. Now, hold the two numbers next to each other. Hundreds of thousands of people removed. Hundreds of billions of dollars redirected into silicon. You do not need to prove that one specific engineer was traded for one specific rack of chips. The scale does the arguing. A company that cuts 10,000 salaries frees up perhaps $1 billion or $2 billion a year. A company that wants another $500 million cluster has to find that money somewhere. On a spreadsheet, those two facts are not unrelated. They are the same line, read twice. Here is the part that should be hard to believe. When Meta cut tens of thousands of people, the market did not punish it. It rewarded it. Go back to the start of 2023. Meta's stock had been crushed, down nearly 2/3 from its peak, battered by a slowing business and an expensive, unpopular bet on the metaverse. The company looked to many like it had lost its way. Then came the year of efficiency. And over the course of 2023, as Meta cut and cut again, and promised discipline, its stock did not just recover, it nearly tripled. One of the great single-year runs in the history of the company. Sit with the message in that. The same investors who had doubted Meta were now applauding it. And what they were applauding, more than any product, was the removal of people. Every 1,000 jobs cut was read as 1,000 reasons to believe management was serious. Discipline had a price, and the price was paid by employees who, a year earlier, had been told they were the most valuable thing the company owned. Picture the two halves of that year happening at once. In one building, people are packing badges and plants into boxes, watching their access to the systems they built quietly switch off. Years of knowledge. Why a feature exists, how a system breaks, what a customer actually needs. Walking out the door in cardboard. And in another building, the lights are coming on, forklifts are unloading crates of chips, rows of servers hum to life, drawing as much power as a small town. One set of doors closing, another opening, both in the same annual report, both under the same word: efficiency. And the lesson did not stay at Meta. Every chief financial officer in the industry was watching. They saw the experiment run, and they saw the result. You could remove thousands of people in public, and the market would not flinch. It would cheer. From that moment, efficiency was no longer a phase to apologize for. It was a strategy to repeat. The axe had been blessed. If the cuts had been about the bubble, they would have ended when the bubble did. They didn't. The profits came back. Revenue hit new records. The crisis that had justified the first round of layoffs was, by every measure, over, and the cutting continued anyway. Because by now, it was not a response to bad times. It was a strategy for good ones. In 2024, the industry shed roughly another 100,000 jobs. And as the months passed, the explanations stopped hiding behind the economy. The companies began to say the quiet part out loud. They were not cutting because business was bad. They were cutting because of AI. By 2026, the language was explicit. More than 100,000 tech jobs were cut in a single stretch, across Meta, LinkedIn, Salesforce, Intuit, and more. Google announced fresh layoffs even as it poured money into AI. Oracle cut staff in moves reported openly as tied to artificial intelligence. The tool the workers had helped build was now the reason given for their removal. And here is the acidic truth at the center of it. These were not desperate companies. They were among the most profitable enterprises on the planet, laying off workers after the profits had returned, because the market had learned to value a company's AI position more than its people. A headline about a giant new cluster of chips moved the stock up. A headline about too many employees moved it down. So the spreadsheet did what spreadsheets do. There is a logic to it, cold and complete. Labor, a CFO will tell you, can be hired back later. Infrastructure compounds now. It widens your margins, it deepens your moat, it locks in your customers. A laid-off engineer is an expense removed. A 10,000 chip cluster is an advantage that lasts a decade. But something is lost that never shows up on the ledger. The mid-level engineer who knew why the system was built that way. The designer who remembered the user. The institutional memory of an entire industry, removed in bulk to satisfy a new arithmetic. The machines are permanent now. The people were the variable, and almost no one, watching the stock go up, asked what the variable knew. It is tempting to call this a simple story, just automation, arriving on schedule, or just greed, wearing a new word. But that is too easy, and it lets the rest of us off the hook, because no single villain decided this. Every step was reasonable. Overhiring, then correcting, reasonable. Becoming efficient, reasonable. Investing in the most important technology of the age, reasonable. Rewarding the companies that move fastest, reasonable. One sensible decision at a time, an entire industry rebuilt itself around a simple proposition, that the future belongs to those who own the machines, and that people are the cost you cut to afford them. It was never hidden. It was in the earnings calls, in the press releases, in the 2 columns of every balance sheet, the people leaving on one side, the chips arriving on the other, the same decision written twice, in plain sight. And the question from the beginning is still here, still unanswered. If the future of technology is a handful of companies owning the world's thinking machines, and they paid for those machines, in part, by thinning their own ranks, then who exactly is it being built for? The desks are empty, the servers are full, and the lights in the data center never go off.